The air hung thick with the perfume of jet fuel and the unspoken tension of delayed departures. Clearwater International Airport, a haven for the privileged, hummed with a low thrum of discontent. A cluster of impeccably dressed executives huddled near the gleaming silver flank of a Gulfstream G650, their faces a mixture of impatience and thinly veiled disdain. The Carter Skytech corporate jet. Delaney Carter's personal chariot, and a symbol of the company's soaring success, was grounded. A critical engine malfunction, they were told, required a specialized team from headquarters. They expected a sleek black car, disgorging men in crisp suits, armed with diagnostic computers and proprietary tools. What they got instead was a cloud of dust and the rumbling protest of a battered pickup truck. It rattled to a stop beside the pristine jet, a rusty, dented anachronism in a world of polished chrome and titanium alloys. The dust settled, revealing its occupant, a man who looked as though he'd been assembled from spare parts found in a backwoods garage. Clayton Ree. His jeans were faded and worn, clinging to his lean frame like a second skin. A threadbare flannel shirt, stained with the ghosts of 1,000 oil changes, strained against his broad shoulders. His boots, caked in mud and grease, left gritty imprints on the tarmac as he stepped out. No polished briefcase, no sophisticated equipment bag, just a worn canvas tool bag slung over his shoulder, its contents clinking with the reassuring weight of well-used wrenches and screwdrivers. A ripple of laughter, tinged with nervousness, spread through the assembled executives. "Are we being punked?" a man in a tailored Armani suit muttered, adjusting his diamond cufflinks. "Did they send us a farmhand?" A woman with a designer handbag, clutched to her chest like a shield, sniffed disdainfully. "This has to be a mistake. Someone needs to call headquarters now." Their whispers, sharp as shards of glass, bounced off the polished fuselage of the grounded jet. They saw a grease-stained mechanic, an anomaly in their meticulously curated world. They saw a disruption, an inconvenience, a source of amusement. They did not see the quiet competence in Clayton's eyes, the steady strength in his calloused hands, the years of experience etched into the lines on his face. But from behind the panoramic windows of the VIP lounge, one person saw differently. Delaney Carter, heiress to the Carter Skytech empire, watched Clayton with a flicker of intrigue in her cool gray eyes. She had grown up surrounded by the trappings of wealth and privilege, accustomed to the deference and veiled envy of those around her. She had learned to see through the polished facades and empty promises, to recognize the genuine article beneath the layers of artifice. And in Clayton Ree, with his dusty boots and quiet confidence, she sensed something real. Ignoring the snickers and sidelong glances, Clayton walked towards the jet with a purposeful stride. He didn't bother to acknowledge the whispers or defend his presence. His focus was singular, absolute. The aircraft, the lives that depended on its safe operation. He dropped his tool bag with a thud that echoed across the tarmac, a sound that seemed to momentarily silence the mocking whispers. He unlatched the engine, cowling the metallic clang, a stark contrast to the hushed whispers of the onlookers. The pungent aroma of jet fuel intensified a silent warning of the potential danger lurking within Clayton's gaze, swept over the exposed engine, his eyes sharp and assessing his hands. Rough and scarred, moved with the practiced grace of a surgeon. He traced the lines of fuel pipes, checked the wiring harnesses, his fingers lingering on the telltale signs of a critical malfunction. A hairline crack in a fuel line, almost invisible to the untrained eye, located precariously close to the ignition coil. A single spark, and the consequences would be catastrophic. The executives, their initial amusement replaced by a growing unease, watched in stunned silence. They had dismissed him as a bumpkin, a laughable mistake. But as they watched Clayton work, they began to realize they had underestimated him. This wasn't a farmhand. This was a master craftsman, a magician of metal and machinery. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The air grew thick with anticipation. The fate of the Gulf Stream, and perhaps the future of Carter Skytech, rested in the hands of a grease-stained mechanic who had arrived in a rusty pickup truck. The air crackled with a palpable tension. The executives, their initial amusement long gone, watched Clayton with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The sun beat down on the tarmac, turning the air shimmering and hazy. The faint scent of jet fuel mingled with the metallic tang of heated engine components. Clayton, oblivious to the scrutiny, continued his meticulous examination. He had found the fault, a hairline fracture in a fuel line positioned precariously close to the ignition coil. A single spark, and the consequences would be devastating. He reached into his worn canvas tool bag, his hand disappearing into its depths like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. He emerged with a compact welding torch, its brass nozzle gleaming in the sunlight. The executives exchanged nervous glances. Welding on a fuel line. It seemed reckless, almost suicidal, but Clayton's movements were precise, deliberate. He adjusted the flame, a delicate blue flicker against the backdrop of the silver engine. He held the torch with a steady hand, his focus unwavering. The hiss of the welding torch filled the air, a counterpoint to the hushed whispers of the onlookers. Sparks flew, tiny incandescent stars against the bright blue sky. Clayton worked with a focused intensity, his brow furrowed in concentration. His movements were fluid, almost balletic, a dance of metal and man. He manipulated the torch with deft precision, sealing the fractured fuel line with a delicate bead of molten metal. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning fuel and melting metal, a testament to the precarious nature of his task. He worked quickly, efficiently, every movement honed by years of experience. He replaced the damaged insulation, securing it with meticulous care. He checked the fuel pump, the pressure gauge, the ignition system, his fingers tracing the intricate network of pipes and wires, like a blind man reading Braille. He was more than a mechanic. He was a surgeon operating on the heart of a complex machine. The executives watched in captivated silence. They had expected a lengthy repair, a complex process involving specialized tools and diagnostic equipment, but Clayton worked with a simplicity that belied the complexity of the task. He used his hands, his eyes, his intuition, and a few well-worn tools. He was a throwback to a simpler time, a testament to the power of human ingenuity and the enduring value of craftsmanship. As he worked, Delaney Carter watched from the VIP lounge, her initial intrigue deepening into respect. She saw more than just a mechanic. She saw a man of integrity, a man who took pride in his work, a man who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. She had grown up surrounded by men in suits, men who talked a good game, but rarely delivered. Clayton Ree with his grease-stained shirt and quiet competence was a refreshing change. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Clayton straightened up, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his greasy hand. He closed the engine, cowling the metallic click echoing across the tarmac, like the final note of a symphony. He turned to the assembled executives, his face impassive, his eyes betraying no hint of the pressure he had just endured. He nodded curtly, a silent acknowledgement of his accomplishment. The engine sputtered to life, a low rumble that quickly grew into a powerful roar. The Gulf Stream vibrated with renewed energy, ready to take to the skies. The executives erupted in applause, their relief palpable. They had witnessed a miracle, a feat of engineering prowess performed by a man they had initially dismissed as a joke. And in that moment, they realized that true expertise didn't come with a fancy title or a designer suit. It came with calloused hands, a keen eye, and a heart dedicated to the craft. It came with grease and grit. The roar of the resurrected engine reverberated through the air, a triumphant anthem against the backdrop of the hushed awe of the executives. Clayton, his task complete, turned to gather his tools, his movements betraying a weariness that belied the quiet strength he possessed. He had wrestled with a complex machine and emerged victorious, yet he sought no accolades, no pats on the back. His satisfaction stemmed from the job well done, the silent understanding between man and machine. He was a craftsman, not a showman. As he reached for his worn tool bag, the cabin door of the Gulfstream hissed open, the polished steps descending with a quiet whir. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the bright interior, a stark contrast to Clayton's grease-stained presence. Delaney Carter. She descended the steps with an effortless grace, her tailored navy suit a testament to her power and position. Her heels clicked against the metal, a rhythmic counterpoint to the fading rumble of the engine. The executives, still buzzing with the aftershocks of Clayton's performance, parted like water before a ship, their whispers turning into hushed murmurs of speculation. She walked directly towards Clayton, ignoring the curious stares of her entourage. The air crackled with an unspoken energy, a silent acknowledgement of the unusual meeting about to unfold. The sun, now higher in the sky, cast a warm glow on Delaney's face, highlighting the sharp intelligence in her grey eyes. She stopped a few feet from Clayton, the distance between them charged with an unspoken tension. "You fixed it," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the residual murmurs of the crowd. Clayton nodded his gaze, meeting hers without flinching. "Yes, ma'am." "No." Delaney corrected, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "You saved it. My pilot told me the engine was beyond repair. He said we would need to ground it for a week, at least." "He missed a cracked fuel line," Clayton replied, his voice even betraying no hint of boastfulness. "It was nearly touching the ignition coil. One spark." He let the sentence hang in the air, the unspoken implication clear. Delaney's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in thoughtful consideration. "You could have walked away," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could have said it was too dangerous, too complex. You could have let someone else deal with it." "I don't walk away from fire hazards," Clayton replied simply, his gaze unwavering. A beat of silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken understanding. The executives, still hovering nearby, held their breath, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. This wasn't just a conversation between a CEO and a mechanic. It was a clash of worlds, a meeting of two very different kinds of power. Delaney took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, her voice soft, almost intimate. "Delaney Carter," Clayton replied, his gaze steady. "Carter Skytech." "And you don't seem impressed," she observed, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I'm not here to be impressed," Clayton said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm here to fix problems." A slow smile spread across Delaney's face, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, transforming her from a formidable CEO into a woman of surprising vulnerability. She had spent her life surrounded by sycophants, by people who were more impressed by her wealth and status than by her character. Clayton's indifference to her title was both refreshing and intriguing. "What would you do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If someone like me asked you something completely insane?" Clayton raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Depends how insane." Delaney took a deep breath, her gaze locking onto his. "What if I asked you to marry me?" The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their implications. The executives gasped, their hushed whispers erupting into a cacophony of disbelief. Clayton, however, remained impassive, his expression betraying no hint of surprise or shock. He simply looked at Delaney, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to decipher the meaning behind the audacious proposition. The silence stretched taut and heavy, punctuated only by the distant rumble of aircraft engines and the sharp intakes of breath from the stunned onlookers. Clayton stood before Delaney, his grease-stained hands hanging loosely at his sides, his expression unreadable. He didn't laugh, didn't scoff, didn't even blink. He simply met her gaze, his eyes searching hers with a quiet intensity. He had spent his life dealing with broken machines with tangible problems that could be fixed with wrenches and welding torches. This, however, was a different kind of challenge, a complex equation with an unknown solution. Delaney held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. The words had hung in the air, audacious and unexpected, even to her own ears. She had acted on impulse, driven by a sudden surge of something she couldn't quite name. Admiration, gratitude, or perhaps something more profound. Something that resonated with a deep, unmet need within her, finally. Clayton broke the silence, his voice quiet but firm. "You don't even know me." "That's why I'm asking," Delaney replied, her voice barely above a whisper. A flicker of amusement danced in Clayton's eyes. "Come again?" Delaney stepped closer, her heels clicking against the tarmac, the sound echoing in the charged silence. "I've been proposed to 23 times, she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "By men in suits who memorized my net worth and called it love, but you—" She paused, her gaze locking onto his. "You walked into this chaos, saved my jet, risked your life, and asked for nothing in return." "I didn't do it for you," Clayton said, his voice. "Even I did it because it needed to be done." "Exactly," Delaney whispered, a smile playing on her lips. "That's what makes it real." Clayton looked down at his grease-stained hands, then back at Delaney, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You want to marry a mechanic?" "No," Delaney replied, her voice firm. "I want to marry the only man here who didn't try to impress me." The setting sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, painting the scene in hues of orange and purple. The air cooled, carrying the scent of approaching evening. The executives, still reeling from the unexpected turn of events, watched from a distance, their whispers hushed and awed. Clayton wiped his greasy hands on a rag, his gaze still fixed on Delaney. "If you're serious," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Take off your heels." Delaney blinked, surprised by the unexpected request. "What?" "If you're serious about getting to know the real me," Clayton repeated, "take off your shoes. Come walk with me. 5 minutes. No titles, no headlines, just two people on the same ground." Delaney hesitated for a moment, then a slow smile spread across her face. She bent down, slipped off her heels, and placed them neatly beside her designer handbag. The cool concrete of the tarmac sent a shiver up her legs, a grounding sensation that felt strangely liberating. She looked up at Clayton, her eyes shining with a newfound sense of adventure. "Where to?" she asked, her voice soft. Clayton nodded towards the perimeter of the airfield, where a row of aging hangars stood, silhouetted against the twilight sky. "Come on," he said, and turned to walk, his boots crunching against the tarmac, the sound echoing in the stillness of the evening. Delaney followed her bare feet, padding softly against the concrete, a strange sense of peace settling over her. She didn't know where they were going, what they would talk about, or what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't care. She was walking away from the world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, and into the unknown, hand in hand, with a man who saw her not as a CEO, but as a woman. And in that moment, she felt more alive than she had in years. The setting sun cast long shadows as Clayton and Delaney walked towards the dilapidated hangars, their footsteps echoing in the quiet of the airfield. Delaney, her bare feet now accustomed to the rough texture of the tarmac, felt a strange sense of liberation. She had spent her life walking on polished marble floors, her every step measured and controlled. This, however, was different. This was raw, unfiltered, real. She glanced at Clayton walking beside her. With his easy stride, his shoulders relaxed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He seemed completely at ease in this environment, a stark contrast to the stiff formality of the executives she was used to. They reached the hangars, weathered and worn by time and the elements. Clayton stopped before one, its metal door rusted and creaking. He pulled it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Delaney stepped inside her eyes, adjusting to the gloom. The air smelled of oil and grease, a familiar scent to Clayton, a stark contrast to the sterile perfume of Delaney's world. The hangar was Spartan, almost empty, a workbench cluttered with tools, a few old airplane parts scattered on the floor, and a faded photograph on the wall. A younger Clayton grinning ear to ear, standing beside a man who bore a striking resemblance to him. His father. My father built his life, fixing engines. Clayton said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He taught me everything I know. Delaney looked at the photograph, her gaze lingering on the two smiling faces. She could see the same quiet strength in the father's eyes that she saw in Clayton's. She could sense the legacy of hard work, of dedication, of a life built on something tangible and real. Suddenly the quiet was shattered by the sound of a car approaching. Headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the interior of the hangar. A sleek black SUV pulled up outside its engine idling. The driver's side door opened, and a figure emerged, his silhouette sharp against the headlights. Jason Pennington, Delaney's COO and longtime advisor, stepped out, his face tight with disapproval. He was dressed impeccably, his suit pristine, his shoes polished, a stark contrast to the grime and grit of the hangar. Delaney. He said, his voice sharp with reproach. What is the meaning of this? Delaney turned to face him, her expression calm. Jason, what are you doing here? The entire world is looking for you, Jason replied, his voice rising in frustration. Your jet missed its departure. The media is in a frenzy. Shareholders are panicking. And you're here in this place with... He trailed off, his gaze fixed on Clayton with undisguised disdain. This is Clayton Ree, Delaney said, her voice steady. He's the reason your precious jet is even flying. Jason scoffed. A mechanic. Delaney, this is absurd. You're a Carter. You have responsibilities. You can't just throw everything away for some... He struggled to find the right word, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Don't... Delaney interrupted, her voice dangerously low. Don't you dare belittle him. He's worth 10 of you. Jason's face flushed with anger. Delaney, this is madness. You're risking everything. Your reputation, your company, your legacy. My legacy. Delaney repeated, her voice laced with a hint of amusement. You think my legacy is built on boardrooms and balance sheets? You think it's about the size of my bank account? She turned to Clayton, her eyes softening. My legacy. She said, her voice filled with a newfound conviction, is about this. It's about finding something real in a world of manufactured perfection. It's about choosing happiness over headlines. She took Clayton's hand, her fingers interlacing with his grease-stained ones. She looked back at Jason, her gaze steady and unwavering. I'm done playing your game, Jason, she said, her voice ringing with finality. I'm done living a life that isn't mine. I'm choosing my own path, and Clayton is coming with me. Jason stared at them, his face a mask of disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, realizing the futility of his arguments. He had underestimated Delaney, underestimated the strength of her conviction, underestimated the power of a connection forged not in boardrooms or cocktail parties, but in the gritty reality of a dusty hangar. He turned and walked back to his car, defeated, leaving Delaney and Clayton standing hand in hand, the setting sun casting a warm glow on their faces, the promise of a new beginning hanging in the air. The black SUV sped away, its taillights disappearing into the gathering darkness, leaving a trail of dust and the faint scent of burning rubber. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the gentle sigh of the wind and the distant hum of the airfield. Delaney and Clayton stood hand in hand, the weight of Jason's departure, the weight of expectations shed lifting from their shoulders. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a breathtaking backdrop to their newfound freedom. Delaney looked at Clayton, his face etched with a quiet strength, his eyes reflecting the warm glow of the sunset. She saw not a mechanic, but a man of integrity, a man who had shown her the value of authenticity in a world obsessed with appearances. She squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of the shared understanding that had blossomed between them. "What now?" Clayton asked, his voice soft, a hint of uncertainty in his tone. He had spent his life fixing machines, navigating the tangible world of metal and oil. This new terrain, the landscape of the heart, was unfamiliar, uncharted territory. Delaney smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, transforming her face from the cool, composed CEO into a woman radiant with newfound joy now. She said, her voice filled with a quiet confidence. "We fly." She led him back towards the Gulf Stream, its gleaming silver fuselage reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. The executives, still lingering nearby, watched in hushed silence, their faces a mixture of awe and bewilderment. They had witnessed the dismantling of their carefully constructed world, the shattering of their preconceived notions. They had seen their CEO, the epitome of corporate power and control, choose a grease-stained mechanic over the trappings of wealth and privilege. They had seen the impossible happen, and they were still struggling to comprehend it. Delaney paused at the foot of the aircraft steps, looking up at Clayton. "Are you sure about this?" She asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. She was stepping away from everything she had ever known, everything she had been taught to value. She was embracing the unknown, trusting her instincts, trusting the man who stood before her. Clayton met her gaze, his eyes filled with a quiet strength. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he replied, his voice firm. He took her hand, and together they ascended the steps, leaving the whispers and stares behind. Inside the luxurious cabin, a world of leather and polished wood, Clayton felt a momentary pang of unease. This wasn't his world, not the world of greasy wrenches and the comforting smell of engine oil, but Delaney's hand in his. Her presence beside him grounded him, reassured him. The pilot, still slightly bewildered by the day's events, turned to Delaney. "Where to Miss Carter?" he asked. Delaney looked at Clayton, a silent question passing between them. Then she turned back to the pilot, her voice clear and steady, filled with a newfound sense of purpose. "Anywhere," she said, a smile playing on her lips. "Anywhere but here." The engines roared to life, a powerful symphony of controlled energy. The Gulfstream taxied onto the runway, the lights of the airfield blurring into a streak of light. Then, with a surge of power, the aircraft lifted into the air, soaring above the city, above the whispers and expectations, above the confines of her old life. Delaney looked out the window, watching the city lights recede below, a sense of exhilaration coursing through her veins. She had taken a leap of faith, a leap into the unknown. She had chosen love over legacy, authenticity over artifice, and in doing so, she had found something far more valuable than wealth or power. She had found herself beside her. Clayton watched the city lights fade into the distance, his hand still clasped in Delaney's. He had spent his life fixing broken machines, bringing order to chaos. Now he was embarking on a different kind of repair, a journey of healing and self-discovery, a journey shared with a woman who had shown him the true meaning of flight. As the Gulf Stream soared into the night sky, they looked at each other, their eyes reflecting the starlight, their hearts filled with the promise of a future unwritten, a future filled with the boundless possibilities of love and freedom.